So this lesson, we're going to be looking at how we can shorten the if condition. So instead of having if and then the couple conditions there, and if these are both true, then we run the function, we can do that all within one statement, all one line of code, without using the if, where we just have the conditions, and if the conditions are true, then it's going to run the function at the end. If one of the conditions is false, it's no longer going to run the function. So if they're all true, then what happens in the console is on line 12, we're going to run this code. Fun is going to be true. We're going to output the value of val, incrementing it by 1, and output into the console. So this one as well is going to be all true. We're going to run the function, output into the console, and then also an example of how you can do it with the if statement. So depending on what you want to use, the result is all going to be the same. You can have as many conditions as you want and chain them all together with the AND operator. There's also how you can create some page elements and then adding a clickable button to the page. And clicking the button will increment a counter. And within the counter, we're using the same statements where we're checking to see if a condition is true. If it is true, then we're running a function, and within this function we've got some arguments, and we've also got a returned result within the function that then we can use within the statement and use that object value in the code. And so we're checking to see if the value of counter is divisible by 3, and if the remainder is 0, then we're running the adder function and setting it to be red. If it's divisible by 2, then we're running the adder function and we're outputting the value as blue. So depending on what the value of the counter to be clicked, we're going to get different returned results. And that's all coming from the one function, and we also have the returning of the element that was created. So going through some different examples of how to shorten some of your function and condition code. Let's go ahead and add the script file to our HTML. I've got that opened on the browser on the right-hand side, and also the DevTools window opened on the bottom of the right-hand side window. So create the script tag and add the source for the script tag. And the source is going to be a file located within a JS directory that I've named app1.js. So linking to the JavaScript file. And from there, we're going to create the page elements and create the interaction, and then look at some of the things that we can do with functions in JavaScript. So once you've got the web page set up, let's create a main container. So using a variable called output, document, create element. The element that we're going to be creating is going to be a div. So adding in the div into the output, and I want to append it to the document body object. So this will give us a container to work with, and I'll use the prepend, so it'll add the output element just before the JavaScript code. So that's going to add the div to the page. We don't have any contents in the div yet, but if we do go over to the element within the body, there's the div that we've created. So now we can add some content into the div. So selecting within the div, and let's add in some text content, and add in the value of output. So that adds the word output into the text content there. Let's also create a button. So we'll create a message area and as well as a button. So using the same thing that we just did, where we create an element, and then we're going to add this within the output div. So this one as well will be a div, and that will be the message object. And then we'll also add in a button that we can use. So once again, using the document create element, and this time we're going to create a button, and then we'll add some text onto the button. So the text content on the button will just say click me. So let's append both of those to the output element. So we can use the main output element and then the append in order to append the message div. In addition, output and append, and we're going to append the button to the page. So that will add all of those elements to the page. And instead of having the output within the output element, which is the parent of message, let's go ahead and we're going to add that into the message object. So now that will have output. Let's take a look at the structure. within the page elements. So we've got the div that we've created, and then within the message div, we've got the word output, and then we've got a button that says click me. So we're ready to make some interaction within the page elements. Let's add in an event listener to the button. So adding in the onClick event, and this is where we can have a function that's going to run whenever the button is clicked. And we'll have a counter as well. So that will allow us to count the button clicks. So every time the button is clicked, we're going to increment the counter by 1, and then within the message text content, add in whatever we have the value for the counter. So this will just have a current count value of the number of times it's been clicked. So let's do something with the functions where we can run some code depending on what the value is. So create a function, and this will just be an adder function. So what this will do is this is going to add to message, and we're going to create another element. So this one will just be another div. So using the document, create element, and the element type that we're creating will be a div, and then append to the output, append the div. So within the adder, we're going to add in the new div. And what we'll do is we'll do an append child. So this will be the return on the function, and this will add in the new value into the output area, so it'll add a new div. So let's have a condition where we'll check to see if counter modulus 3 has a value. So if there is a value that's being returned back, then what we'll do is we're going to run the adder, and this is going to create a new element and return it back as it's appending it to the child within the output element. And within the element itself, add in some text content where we're going to just return back whatever we've got the value that's being returned back for counter modulus 3. So now every time the counter is divisible by 3 and returns back 0, we're not going to have any value that's being added. But if we are able to return back a value for the division of the counter by 3, if there is a remainder, then that will be output onto the page. So that's essentially what's being output here. And that's if it does have a remainder, that right now counter is 1. If you divide it by 3, there's going to be a remainder of 1. So again, 3 only goes into counter value, and it goes in 0 times and returns back a remainder of 2. The next time we click it, 3 is divisible by 3, so there is no remainder. So this comes back as false because there's no value there, and it comes back as 0, so that's equivalent to no value. That's why we don't get that response there. So these are the counter values, and these are the remainders there that we've got within the counter. So let's just add it only if the value of the remainder is 0. So this will write it every value that clicker when it's divided by 3 if it has no remainder. So it'll output those values on every third click. So outputting the value there. So let's try another way to do this, where we're going to do it within the expression and have the statement there within the same expression. And we'll pass in the value within the adder as the HTML content, and we'll just call that HTML. And this will update the text content. So set up a variable that can hold the HTML value. And then here within when we create the element, we're going to set the element text content to be the counter value. So this will work the same way, but it's just another way to write the statement. And you should also include this within the adder, so you don't have to have a separate value for HTML. So that's another way to do the exact same thing, and it just shortens the statement. So another way to do this is to have the expression and then also set it up this way. So now let's comment out this block of code, and then we'll run through the code within the function. So when we click it, we're still getting the same response, but now we've written the statement, including the condition, all within the one line of code. So we don't have the separate condition that's running the function. we have it all done within one line of code. And if we want to return back the element, we can do it this way as well. And then here we can output the elements into the console and then do something with the element that gets returned back. So once the element is returned back within the console, there's the element that's been selected. So we can do something with the element because we're returning the element back within the function. So take the element and let's apply some style properties to it. Set the color and set the color to be red. And the problem here is that we don't always necessarily return back the element. So it's only if both of these statements, so if this statement is true and we get a response back from the element, then that's where we get a value for the element. So we can update this where we can have a condition to see if the element exists. And if the element does exist, then we'll set the color to be red. So that way we're only setting it to be red if the element actually does exist. So if it doesn't exist within this condition, then we don't do anything with it. So this is just one example of what we can do where we're checking to see if the condition is true. And if this condition is true, then we run the function, we pass in the arguments into the function, returning back the response back from the function, and then that gets assigned to the value, and then from there we can make use of that element value. So we can also update this second line where instead of looking to check if the element exists, we can shorten this, and then that way we can check if that expression is true, and if it does come back true, then we can set the color, and we need to do that within a function. So let's set that where we're going to check to see if the element exists, and if it does exist, then we're going to pass the value of the color and the element that we want to use into a function, and we'll just call it updater. So it'll update the element and then apply the color of red to there. So that's going to run the function code. So we can get rid of this line and create a brand new function. And so this was the updater function. So the first one is the element and then the color that we want to use. So passing in these two arguments, and then we can take the element, apply the style, color, and whatever color value we have that we've sent in. So that will do the same where it's going to update it within that same type of statement. And we get the same output once again. And really the shortest way to do this is if you did want to update that current existing element, then you can take the value and pass it over into the element at the time and make an update of the style. So where you've got the element, and if you want to set a particular color to the element, then you can do that here, or you could send it directly within the updater, and that would make the update of the element directly here, setting in within the adder that we want a color, and then the element itself would be a div, and this CL would just be a property, another property value within the adder function that we're adding in alongside with the HTML code. So let's update this, and this would be the HTML code. And the next option that we have here is just going to be the color of red. And then I can even comment out that line of code. So once again, doing the same functionality, but keeping it all within the one line of code. And we don't even need to return back the element here within the statement, because we're not actually doing anything with the element. Everything that we're passing in is done within the one statement where we're sending in. So we're checking to see if our condition is true, and then we're doing something with the value within the element. So let me give you some more examples of what we're doing with the condition here. So if we have a value, so set up a value, and we'll set it to 5. So if we've got a value, and this one is true, that is true, then we can run a function, so just call it fun, and within the function fun, we'll take val1 and update it, and then within the console, let's output the value of val1. So that gives us a value of 6 being output into the console, because once the statement runs, you can have as many conditions as you want here. So you can add in as many, and as long as they're all coming back as true, that is going to be output. If one comes back as false, we're not going to see any of the output within the console. So these all have to come back as true, and they can be any value. So you can have if 4 is greater than 1 and 10 is less than 20, and then it's going to run the function code. So it gives you an option to have a more shorter format instead of having an if condition, because typically what we would do here is that we would write and we would have whatever our condition is, 5 is greater than 2, and then we run the function. So we execute the function code. And if we have multiple arguments, then we would have to add in those arguments within the condition as well. So you can write this and have a much cleaner statement being run instead of using the if condition. You can do this all within one line of code. And it's essentially what we just did here within the element, where we created the element depending on what the value of counter was. If there's no remainder to the value of counter, then we create an element and we can set up different values here. So we can also have it, if the remainder is 2, set it to blue, and then we'll set the value there for the counter. So on every one that's divisible by 2, it's going to go to blue. If it's divisible by 6, by 3, then we're going to get red. And because this is also divisible by 2, with 0 remainder, that's where we're getting 6 as well, and so on. So as long as we keep clicking, then we can use these types of statements to simplify some of the code that we're writing instead of having the if conditions. So go ahead and try it out and shorten some of your if conditions that are running functions within the code.